look at what we have here.
Yeah, Mark, we're at Lotus of Chicago, also known as Mancuso Motorsports, and they've been crazy enough to lend us an Evora GT.
Yes, and I have some history with Lotus, and I'm excited to check out and look at the evolution of the Evora from where it started about 10 years ago to where it is now. And we're going to detail all the technical things, what makes this a unique car, and an enthusiast product that is very exciting to drive.
And somewhat affordable.
Now, affordable is debatable, but we'll get into that.
All right.
The Lotus Evora. Believe it or not, this was being designed in the mid-2000s, and it has been refreshed, and we're all the way here at kind of the pinnacle version of this. The interior space of the Evora has evolved quite a bit compared to where it started, and this was kind of that push in the direction of Lotus getting up to speed with what the supercars were trying to do. They were trying to get away from some of that minimalistic styled approach in the Exige and Elise and trying to do something a little bit more with more creature comforts, which means it's trying to be more of a GT car while still maintaining the soul of what Lotus started as. And there's some pros and cons to that. Compared to where they were when this car launched, the interior is far better. So let's talk about the basics. Seating position. It's misleading because this is a very tight cabin space. It feels super fitted, it's driver-centric, and when you have the doors closed and the windows up, it's definitely claustrophobic. But once you're in, there's a ton of headroom. So if you're super tall, it may look like you're never gonna fit in here, but you do. You just have to be careful getting in. What they've changed from the original launch version is they've shrunk the sill down, so you don't have to hobble to get in and out. It's a very easy car to get in as long as you're ducking a bit. Now, like with every car, there are some pros and cons of the design. Really, this has that driver-centric feel. Some of the knobs, buttons, and switches don't appear to have the highest quality, like the plastic chrome ring around the light switch, but everything has a really solid, clicky feel to it. It's satisfying. But then you get to some of the implementation or the finer details. Some of the displays, like the infographics here, the LCD screens by the gauge cluster, look like there's something out of the Atari 2600 era. They just look like so low res, just almost comical. The next thing is the attention to detail in terms of illumination. At night, you can dim down the gauge cluster. However, this center stack full of buttons for exhaust, sport mode, and all of that, they stay super bright. And the brightness level on the controls for the Alpine head unit, which is just really a straight aftermarket unit here, that stays bright. The screen, none of this is integrated together well. This is a sports car manufacturer. It's a boutique car company, so some of these things they just figure people are gonna let slide. But this is definitely one of the best Lotus interiors they've ever made. So let's head into the shop and talk about the technical details of the Evora. Underneath the Lotus Evora.
I see you're autographing your own hats, Mark.
Yeah, you know, I'm a big deal, so I autograph my own hats that I wear.
So this car came out in about 2008. So the Evora has been around for almost 12 years, and this was introduced as Project Eagle, which was probably, or it is, the most expensive platform Lotus has ever done.
And this was following up on the Exige and the Elise, and they wanted to take the brand into a new direction. They wanted a GT car to compete with Porsche. They wanted it to be more approachable. So you get out of something like an Elise and you're like, oh my God, you got to be like 3 feet tall to fit in there comfortably. It was razor sharp, super focused, but not particularly good for a majority of the public. So this was trying to stretch out that demographic, give you more. And that was the mindset, but still maintaining the hardcore nature of what Lotus was, and the same team was involved in making this as those cars.
So the CEO at the time, who's a controversial figure, and again, like anything when it comes to Lotus, if you want to learn everything about the rise and fall of this brand, there's probably a documentary out there. But Danny Barhar, who was the CEO at the time, was a larger gentleman at 6'4". And he wanted a car that actually had a business case. So he wanted to build a car that was more mass appeal. So he and Richard Carr, who was the designer, designed a 2+2 sports car, which was mid-engined and basically all aluminum and composite. And that's what this car is.
And when they released it, they botched the launch of it.
Oh, big time.
They released a naturally aspirated version of the Evora, and then the very next year, they released the supercharged version and lowered the price. And this cluster, and I was one of those people that really wanted this car. I was going to go from an Exige to the Evora, and even the person I was with at that time, she was super excited about that car, and then all of this stuff happened, and people got screwed over, and I put this car in the back of my mind, like a lot of people, and here we are. It's still being manufactured
12 years later.
12 years later, and it has evolved. So let's talk about that.
So this is the Evora GT, and this is basically a mid-cycle refresh to the refresh that was the Evora 400 and 410, which came out for the 2017 model year, and that's the biggest jump in the Evora, basically, evolution.
In terms of body structure, they improved aero, all the hang-on panels were changed, and just it looks a little bit more modern than the original Evora.
But the core chassis is the same. It's still the VVA architecture, which means this car was built in 3 parts. You have the tub where the passenger sits, the front subframe, and the rear, and then it has 15 composite body panels that make up the entire body of this car.
So the next part is it's all flat underneath, as you can see, and this is something that Lotus always focused on. Better airflow, the car would be more stable, and that's something that some of the track day cars that people go to after this, like me, I went to an Atom. The Atom does not have any of that. Things like the Caterhams do not have great aero. This does. It's always stable no matter what speed you are. You get balanced downforce front and rear. And what that also helps them to do is assembly, right? I mean, this is all aluminum and composites.
Yeah, but at its core, Mark, let's talk about the suspension. You have double wishbone front suspension, and for the Evora GT, which is a US-only car, we get Bilsteins.
And you get AP racing brakes, which is something they've always had on the Lotus cars, including all of these new aluminum lower control arms. However, probably for cost, they don't have the suppliers or whatever, but they still use cast steel knuckles.
Yep.
And that's something that you've seen with Lotus cars for a long time. But you get into some of the more bigger brands like Porsche, you will see all the forged aluminum knuckle design. That's not something you see here. So there are some trade-offs of what they can and can't do with manufacturing.
Yep, so let's get on the back, Mark.
All right.
So we made it to the back of the Evora, Mark, and this is the rear subframe. It looks much like the front because it's still double wishbone in the back.
In-wheel double wishbone, and Lotus is great because you have complete adjustability. In the front you have camber, caster, and toe, and in the back you have camber adjustments. So you can truly set this up with a wide range of adjustment for any track or street use.
Yep, and just like the front, everything's covered up, and this car does not have it equipped, but there is an optional carbon fiber package which saves some weight and adds some downforce. You also have an optional titanium exhaust, which also saves more weight. From what I understand, though, they sound basically the same.
Okay.
So the engine, and that's really the interesting thing about this car. It's a Camry V6 with an Edelbrock supercharger and a Aisin 6-speed manual. However, Lotus did do their own gears, so it's a close ratio box. You do have an optional Aisin 6-speed automatic, which you could get if you didn't like manual cars.
I don't know why you would do that in a car like that, but it is optional. That's something that they did add with the Evora. That was part of their development of the original cars to try to obviously diversify out. Not everybody wanted a manual. But the manual trans feel in this car has improved greatly from where the Evora started. And it was really wishy-washy what you got in some cars that had good feel, some had sloppy cable linkage, and this also went back to the Elise and Exige had the similar problems.
So all Lotuses, from my understanding, at least the modern ones, they're cable actuated.
They're all cable. Correct? They've always been cable, and that was something that the aftermarket was constantly doing. Every car you got into, somebody had a reinforcement kit for the shifter because it had so much slop in it. This car, at least this one, feels amazing compared to what I'm used to. It feels like a really well-designed linkage.
It's a very enjoyable car to drive. So when it comes to cooling, so this is the Evora GT, which means it makes 410 horsepower, which in a forced induction track car leads to some issues. However, they attempted to address that with added cooling. So if a trans cooler on the manual cars, and from what I believe on the auto cars as well, then all of your radiators up in the front subframe. And the radiator, the primary one, is tilted forward, so
creates higher pressure in that
higher
area
pressure.
to keep it cool. And you have the NACA ducts in the back to cool off the engine. But the main thing, the heart and soul of modern Lotus has always been that relationship with Toyota. And once they ended production of the 4-cylinder engine that was in all the cars, now this is the staple, and it's one of the best engines. If you want reliability in existence, of course, it's just all the other things that I'll get into more in the final thoughts.
Yeah, there are some reliability problems with Lotuses. However, because this car's been around for basically 12 years at this point, after talking to the technicians at Mancuso, they say that these cars, the Evora 410s and the 400s and the GTs, are about as reliable as they've ever been. Almost as reliable as a regular car.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's get this on the street and take it for a drive, Jack.
All right, Mark.
Oh yeah, Jack, the Mancuso Motorsports Evora GT.
Yeah.
This is a very different car. We're on the street, but we're gonna try to explain why this car is special.
All right. I think I need a cigarette after that, Mark.
That's the best, one of the best sounding V6s, and it's a Toyota. How is that possible?
Because Lotus actually believes in the Toyota drivetrain, and when you put a supercharger on a V6 and you have a coffee can for an exhaust, some amazing things can happen in this car's case.
Let's take this through Farm Road Cliche Corner, Jack.
All right.
This is on Cup 2 tires.
Yes.
And that's something we didn't really talk about in the shop, and that's one of the things that makes this car much different initially than the previous cars.
There's so much damn grip in this car.
Yeah. And the side effect is the braking feels a lot more confident. And on the street, you notice it a lot, but we know these are tires that typically go away after extended use. So
yeah, and they have about a 3,000, 4,000 mile lifespan. So, you know, that's something to bring in mind. But regardless of the tires, Mark, obviously I like English cars, but I've never been in a Lotus before. And if you told me about a week ago that I would like this more than a 458 Italia, one of my favorite cars of all time, I would have thought you were crazy. I love this car. It is super, super special feeling.
So let's get into the explanation of what's going on here. Lotus historically has some of the best steering feel you're ever going, any car you're going to get into, the modern ones, Exige, Elise, and now this. And this has a hydraulically assisted steering rack, but the Elise and Exige had a manual operated rack. I have yet to get into any car outside of like a race car or a kart where you feel so much front end grip, and the way that the steering loads up, it feels like you are literally directly connected to the wheels without this car feeling like you're getting jackhammered. And it's something that you can't understand until you drive this car. Nothing else compares. And that's one of the biggest things about Lotus cars, but it's also part of their party trick. And their party trick is, and this is one of the reasons why I sold the Exige, it was a one-trick pony. Mm-hmm. If you were not driving it flat out, if you were not on a track or in an engaging autocross, it lost its charm on the street. This is one step below a pure track day car like an Atom or a Caterham, but this is still, in terms of Lotus speak, this is a GT car for Lotus. If this was any other manufacturer, this would be their most hardcore sports car they ever made.
But if you're looking for a special, memorable experience, one you get in your car, right? If this is your weekend toy, this is your second car that you don't really need to drive every single day, it's a want versus need product. There's nothing else like this. I get why you claim Porsches are numb. After getting into something like this, the car really does move around you, and you feel like you are the center of it. You feel like you're totally connected to this car.
And yeah, and people ask this all the time, and I know that I complain like how Porsches are so lifeless, and you have to get into a car like this to understand why. Porsche, as an engineering team, has to make so many compromises for the market and the people that are buying those cars, because a lot of the Porsche enthusiasts are not the hardcore driver's car track rats that they want to sacrifice everything else
for the thrill of driving.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Porsche has to be more things to more people, and it is far more refined. And if you asked me on a scale what car I would be in, well, I have an Atom, and I never want to be in that car, ever. So I get in here and I think, okay, you have aero. The car doesn't blow around. It doesn't feel unstable. It has a roof. You can still drive this like a normal car, but it's not a car that I would want to be in traffic for any great period of time. So it would be like a 25% use case. Whereas a 911, I would drive that thing.
It's a car you could drive every single day, and that's the advantage of the Porsche. But if you're looking for a weekend toy, I've yet to feel something more special than this under $100,000.
There is nothing else.
This car is really, really incredible. The suspension tuning, I like that it is simple. There are no driving modes other than, sport and race, which is just throttle response and stability control management. It just plug and play. You get in the car, you put it in race, and you go.
This car could teach you a lot about driving. It's mid-engine, so there's some things about mid-engine cars that you have to adjust to from front engine and rear-wheel drive. It's the way that it has a tendency to want to push its way through a corner first. So typically with these cars, you want to get braking done quickly, but you also want to use trail braking to get the car to rotate in. That way, you're not feeling the washout effect. So again, it's one of those driver's tools. You owe it to yourself, if you're a driving enthusiast, to buy one of these at one point, or even just an old Elise or an old Exige used if you can get your hands on it, because this is not going to be around. And I know 100% that these cars are not going to exist anymore. There's no way that they're going to be able to continue to do this and make money. And it's sad because so many people that love cars are missing out on this experience. And you could potentially afford this car new and definitely on the used market.
Yeah, it's super special feeling. There's very little complaints that I have other than what we've talked about.
Let's get into the final thoughts and talk about the pros and the cons.
All right.
Final thoughts on the Lotus Evora GT. It's amazing to see where this car has gone from its early development to now. It's been out for quite a long time for a car company. And that's partly because Lotus has changed hands now. They are owned by Geely. And as a Volvo owner now, I know how that can be a blessing and a curse. It's also given them the money to somewhat restructure and plan ahead. The big problem when you build cars around the enthusiast community is you don't sell a lot of them. And the Evora is a textbook case of potentially not having enough money to stay afloat. So hopefully they can take whatever resources they have and get some type of product made that people will buy in volume so these cars can continue to exist. Because the bottom line is, whatever you think about Lotus, whatever you think about the Evora, it is extremely special. There is nothing that drives like it on the planet. And I'm not even playing that up. You get in and out of all these cars that get overly refined, that have so much focus on every single thing except driving. You get tired of it because they just run together. This is such a unique experience. Manual transmission. The 3.5 liter V6 sounds good with a supercharger. The connectedness that you feel through the body of the car, the chassis, the steering, yes, the steering is remarkable for what it is. And I think it's a testament to people that want to put the effort into it. It shows that they can, except people don't buy this. And if you want to support the brand, if you want to support that ideology, you need to buy this car. If you can't afford it new, try to get your hands on one used. There's just not a lot of them out there. And Mancuso Motorsports, which is local to us, is an official Lotus dealership. They sell new ones, but they also get their hands on used ones, and they try to keep a good, solid inventory, which we've seen. If you want to use one, definitely talk to them. They know everything about it. They've serviced them, and they're going to help you with some of those Lotus-specific questions if you're worried about it, like I was when I bought my Exige. Now, the last thing to say is this will not be like owning a Toyota Corolla. There are things you need to know. Body panels, all composite. This is a clamshell. You have to take hours upon hours to take these things apart. And if you need something, if you get into an accident, you could be waiting months, if not near almost a year for certain parts. And this is more like an exotic car. There's not a lot of dealership support like there used to be. And you know, that again, you have to weigh these things, the pros and cons. The ultimate driver's focused car versus something that, you know, maybe you could drive more year around. This is something as a second or third car, and you're gonna love every minute of it. Believe me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.